Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Opinion Machine, the show where we talk about all things gaming. My name is Killjoy, and today I want to talk about how I've put nearly 900 hours into Civilization 6, and I finally feel like I fully understand the game. So this is an interesting little video, mainly for just to sort of talk about this. But Civ 6 is a game that I have been playing for years. Like I said, I've got pretty much 900 hours into the game. And I was sort of sitting back and thinking about it recently of how much that journey has come from, like, basically picking up the game to essentially feeling like I'm in a place where I could play relatively well / smartly. But I have always enjoyed the Civ games, and you know, I really got into the series from Civ 3, even though I'd seen my older brother play Civ 1 and I played a little bit of Civ 2 myself. But the game that I really spent the most time in, I played a bit of Civ 4, but Civ 5 was the one that I really liked. Like, I really liked Civ 5, and when Civ 6 came out, it took me a while to really get my head around things and understand things and how the game works, stuff like that. So I'm sort of at a point now where, like, I've played the Civ 6 a lot in the last few years, to the point where I get very frustrated with the game because there's a lot of, like, knowledge checking later on. And my older brother's very good at that, and that leads to these games where people can hit power spikes at certain points depending on the Civ they're playing, the wonders they've got, all these sort of things. And it becomes a bit unfun. It's the thing where it's like, if everyone's on the same playing field, it's a close game, comes down to the wire. That's a lot of fun. When someone is significantly better, it can be unfun for the rest of the players, and I get frustrated with it myself. Like, you know, just I get to a point where I'm like, nah, I'm kind of done with this game now. Like, I'm at a point where I can't really do much. I'm just hitting end turn. So what I want to do is I wanted to kind of like make a video and talk about what I'm calling the free levels of Civ 6. Now, please don't take this as gospel. This is just what I think are at level 1, level 2, level 3. And I'm probably missing a lot of stuff here as well. These are just some things that I think that occur, or at least occurred for me while I was playing this game and like starting off the game versus, you know, sort of 400-500 hours into the game to now in 100 hours into the game. But I want to talk about my experience with it. So start off, we have level 1, which is essentially just playing the game, learning victory conditions, and looking at the civs that you can pick and understanding the ones, you know, the straightforward ones. So to me, like, good beginner civs are like Rome, Egypt. This is back when the game first came out. You know, Alexander, if you're going for like military conditions and stuff like that. Like, there's a couple of civs in there that I think are very straightforward and they're very well explained, versus some of the later game civs or some of the extra leaders they added for certain civs that have probably more interesting mechanics, but the kind of team that you might not want to play as a beginner. So when I started out playing this game, I had to learn about districts, because that was the big change. It was like, oh, you can't just build everything in one space on your city. You've got to actually place these districts down, and those districts allow for you to build certain types. So it's like, oh, I've got this capital city. Let's say I'm playing as Rome, and I've got Rome, and that's my main city, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to build all this stuff here. Oh wait, no, now I need to actually place the districts. So that's one huge change. It's like learning about that, and then learning about how each of the victory conditions are. You know, culture victory is not the same as it was in Civ 5. You've got World Congress. Pretty straightforward once you understand how the point system works, and how that works with the synergies of the independent states, essentially. You then have, you know, so you've got all those win conditions, you've got what your civ can do, and you're learning about the new mechanics, the districts, and what's changed, like how spying changed, all these different bits and bobs. So that very beginning stage is very much just like, okay, I'm figuring the game out, what the technology trees are, what the civics trees, because that was different. You had this split trees this time, having those government things. Like, there's so much stuff to just wrap your head around very early on, because there are so many mechanics. There's a lot of different mechanics from Civ 5, and you know, it took me a while. It took me a while to really understand it. Some of that stuff I didn't fully understand until more recently, right? So that's the first sort of starting point for most players, and it'll be the same again when Civ 7 comes out. Like, there will probably be giant changes in that game where maybe the first 100 hours, maybe the first 200 hours, it's just like, okay, I'm playing this, what I consider a simple Civ. I'm figuring out how the mechanics work, you know, and going from there, essentially. And I do think there's a lot of stuff that you miss playing this game to begin with. Well, I certainly did. When, as you go on, you go, oh, you can do this, this works with this, you know, all these different bits and bobs. But ultimately, all you're doing is you're playing to win, really, to start with. You're playing to win, you're going, this is who I'm picking, I'm going to try and do this particular victory condition. Like, military's an easy one because you're just like, I need to build an army, and I need to support the army. So once you kind of figure out, oh, I get money from these things, this is the kind of army I want to tech towards, like, you know, having multiple different unit varieties to be able to take down cities. Kind of straightforward. You still got to learn what different units do and how they work, but fairly straightforward. You know, and probably the most complicated victory condition in the game, even though it's one of the easier ones in my opinion, one of the most complicated ones to understand is culture and tourism, and that comes into level 2, so we'll get to that in a minute. But you pick the kind of the playstyle you want to play, and you just go from there, and you just build stuff willy-nilly. You're like, oh, that's culture related, or that's a military unit. You know, you're not even thinking about X, Y, and Z. I mean, we're not even onto the point where the expansions have introduced like more natural, you know, natural disasters or Golden Age and Dark Age. I'm not even talking about that stuff. Like, that just comes with the expansions, right? So you've got to learn all that stuff as well. But essentially, you know, you are trying very you know, just to figure stuff out and go from there and be like, yep, cool, like, this is great. Like, hopefully I've got a better understanding of how this game works. And then that's when you can start looking into some of the deeper mechanics. So level 1, just to recap, is playing the game, picking civs that seem to make sense to the player, and just learning those victory conditions. Going, okay, I'm going to do a culture this time, I'm going to do a science, and, you know, figure out what works and who works for those things. Because every civ can get any victory condition. Some definitely have spikes in different parts of the game. Some work better towards certain ones, and so you figure that out. And then you come to level 2, and this is the place that I think I was stuck in for the longest time, because this is where a lot of learning's done about. So you know how to pick, you know how to win the game, you know how the different win victory conditions are, but do you fully understand like how to take advantage of some of those things? So like I said earlier, I think one of the biggest things is understanding culture and tourism, and I think Civ 6 does a really bad job of describing how this works. So culture, the higher culture you have, if you've got a really strong culture, that's how you can take, as one of the factors in taking, well, converting people, but also taking over other cities. So if you're pumping out a ton of pressure from culture, you can convert other cities. And some civs are very good at that, some civs aren't, but it's about loyalty, right? So you have a high culture, usually a high loyalty. Population obviously helps, and you can pressure other cities to them to flip to neutral cities and then flip to you. So you have that, and then you have tourism, which is your attack, essentially. So culture is like defense, tourism is like your attack. The higher your tourism, the more likely you're going to win through a culture victory, which is you've got a ton of your tourists, or you're attracting tourists from other places. They want to come to your cities, they don't want to be in their own ones. And that's how that works. But that took me, you know, I think in the last like 4 years is probably when I figured that one out. That is, it doesn't do a very good job of explaining it. It's kind of like, oh, this is attack and defense, and you have to spend a lot of time looking at like what works and what doesn't work, and figuring out, hey, you know, culture's how I sort of grow my own cities, but if I want to like take other people's, like, if I want to get tourism, like, I need to get these bonuses and items that help essentially allow me to attack other cities, to bring, you know, culture from them to me through the art of tourism, so that I can win by having the best culture and, you know, sending out all my music, my writing, all that sort of stuff to people. So that's one of the big things. I think that was trying to understand that really helped be like, okay, I think I get this. This is how I can pressure other people. Obviously loyalty has a big part of it. I mean, I could be wrong. It might just be like pop size and loyalty. But I'm pretty sure culture has a factor on flipping cities. But I'm sure if I'm wrong on that, somebody will tell me in the comments. Then one of the big things about this sort of second step was the radial buttons to set a focus on your city. In the bottom right hand corner, and so hopefully while I'm talking there is footage of Civ, probably from the beginning. There are, in the bottom right corner, when I clicked on a city, these little radial buttons that I never noticed before. And my brother points out, oh, you can focus your city on different things. And it's usually food, work, money, science, culture. I think are the 5 ones. There might be one I'm missing, but I think that's it. Maybe faith as well. And when I was told this, I was like, oh, so you can focus your cities? This became a big factor in, oh, so if I need money, I can focus these guys because I've got commercial districts to pump out more money at the expense of, you know, everything else. Or I want it to focus on money and growth. And that was a big game changer, because now you're like, oh, this thing's going to take like 10 turns. Wait a minute, I've got a lot of ability for the little cog symbols, a lot of work. Boom, now it's only going to take 5 turns at the expense of other things. But the idea here is that what do you want to do with your cities? Well, you want to grow them, because when they grow, the more population, the faster things get done. That also helps pressure any other cities around nearby. So you have that. Or you're like, kind of low on money, I need that. So you like focus on the wealth side of things, and you can like pump that out and do that. And then you've also got things like growth. So you've got growth for that. And then you've got science and culture. So you're like, oh, I really want to like get these things quicker. I'm going to focus my cities to do this. Now, these are things that you should be switching about to and from. Every time a city's done doing the thing you want to do, boom, you either turn it on or turn it off, switch that particular one off onto something else. And there's a lot of focus on that with the cities. It gets very micromanagement heavy in terms of dealing with these things. But those radial buttons made a big difference. For me, personally, I only really use them for growth and work. But there's obviously a reason to use it for science, culture, all these other stuff. If you're really trying to like, I need that science quickly, because I want the wonder that's attached to it. There's a good reason to do that. So that was a big thing. That really helped me start to like, oh, I can pump things out quicker. I can get my cities to grow quicker. One thing I had no idea about, I kind of knew about it, but what I learned more about and actually tried to put some time into was adjacency bonuses with districts specifically. Or you can do this with wonders as well, but this was at a point where I was like, I know what each district does, and trying to start to understand how the adjacency works. Oh, if I put this let's say a religion district next to some mountains, that really buffs up the amount of faith I can pump out of it from just the basic district per turn, and then you add to that, and that can pump out more based on great people, based on the buildings you build in there, wonders, all that sort of stuff. And this is something that I think is absolutely massive to the game of Civ 6, is really figuring out adjacency bonuses. And I somewhat have ignored it for a long time. Like, it wasn't that I wasn't doing it, I just didn't always see I couldn't always see what you would, the long game for it. Like going, oh wait, hang on, if I can get all of my science districts to be pumping out 10 science, or a very high number of like plus that just from the get-go, realistically 4 to 5 is, I consider, a good start. And then you can buff it up by putting things next to it. Then you get these big boosts, these big bonuses, these big power spikes that really do help out the Civ. And that takes a lot of time. I think a lot of time and a lot of planning and figuring things out. And I think that's, again, one of those biggest things. Level 2 to me was a lot of understanding, and it's a lot of the point of the game where you are figuring these more minute details out that can have huge effects, like the radial buttons for the cities, like doing the adjacency bonuses. So that's obviously a big thing. And that was something that, again, took me a while, but like I sort of finally getting that and understanding that. After that, you then got sort of trying to play to the strengths of the Civ that you've picked. So, I was saying playing Rome and playing Egypt and other Civs that are maybe a bit easier on. They have, 4 or 5 things that they get from a bonus. Now, to start with, I was like, okay, I might look at 1 or 2 of those things, but what do I actually get? Like, what are my bonuses? What do I get? Oh, this gives me a lot more housing when this is placed down. This gives me a lot more, like, amenities. And looking at what your bonuses are and how they work, and playing around that to this, like I said, the strength of the Civ. Because if you've got a Civ like, I think Aztecs get, I can't remember the exact thing. This is the thing. The game wants you to knowledge check a lot of stuff, but I think the Aztecs gain 2 amenities, or they get extra bonuses from luxury resources. When you start figuring that stuff out, you suddenly realize, wait, I don't have to worry about entertainment districts as much. I'm not having to worry about keeping my people happy because I get this huge buff if I do these things. You find a few different luxury goods and luxury resources, you're now getting that big buff, and that can be a massive thing to be, right, I don't need to focus on these things, I can focus on the other things I want to do. And that's what comes down to it. Like, when you're picking the civs, or if you're playing random, like if you play random and it comes up and it's like, hey, you're playing Rome. Well, Rome get like, and every time a city's built, you get one of the low-level buildings put into the main city. They gain like instant roads if they're in line with the capital. They get a lot of these like movement bonuses and almost like an extra start on their cities. There's one less thing you have to build there. So you want to play to the strength of that and look at what they have. They get the bath, which is cheaper than I think it's the equivalent of the aqueduct, but they get a bigger boost, I think, in terms of housing. So you're like, oh, I can grow my cities quite quickly. So you spend a lot of time focusing on that, and hopefully not other things, like building the bath. Like, boom, that's a big boost. I don't need to worry about population or growth so much. I can now focus on other things, and that's what it comes down to. There's a lot of balancing going on there of what does my civ actually, where are the strengths of this civ? Oh, they get an early workshop essentially. Boom, I've got tons more construction, like, you know, the cogs. I can pump things out a lot quicker. I don't have to go through the usual hoops of waiting to this era to start doing that. I can do it significantly earlier, which allows me to have bonuses and focus on the other things I want to do. And that's kind of what it comes down to, is like whatever they're really good at, that helps you get to another point. So it's like it's all these steps you're basically doing, but that understanding why and how a civ works, that is core, and what the buffs and bonuses are. You know, they all get different units, but ultimately a lot of the buildings that they get, or a lot of the districts that they get that are unique to them, are huge buffs and bonuses over what would be the equivalent. So you have to kind of really think about that. It might be one of the ones where it's like, oh, you get this like a district, and you get a ton of extra science from placing it here, here, and here. So you're like, oh, so this gives me like entertainment, but if I stick it here, here, and here, I've got a ton of science as well. So it's like layers of things piling on top of layers of things, really, and that's how you get those like big buffs. One thing I also learned, you know, is during this stage is like better placement of cities and why. You know, when I first started the game, playing the game, I just look at the land around me. I'm like, oh, that's got luxury resources. That has build cities around, make a big essentially a big border, and just have a lot of land. You know, and then that can be good, and there are elements to just doing that if you want to just go for land grab and stuff. But the thing is, ultimately, when you're placing a city down, and you've probably seen it in the footage, I play Civ with a lot of mods. We haven't even got onto that, but I play Civ with a lot of mods now that have really helped me understand the game. And one of those is being able to put, like, you know, see a lot more of where you get the buffs and bonuses from placing down the tax, and just understanding what you can get in the long run for a city. And that's really it. Like, why am I settling a city here? What am I doing it for? This one has a ton of just luxury resources. Okay, so this city isn't going to be great at many things, but I can get buffs around having those luxury resources. Or maybe this one's on the coast, and coastal cities can have a big buff to my money because I can have a harbour, and if there's a river there as well, I can have the harbour nets next to the commercial district that again gets a buff from the river. And that's the thing, districts have a ton of, they tell you everything that they get a buff from. They're like, this is how you gain extra on these, by placing it with this, and this. So you're starting to like figure out all of that stuff. And even then, like, it's only taken to me more recently where I'm like, okay, I'm really focusing on that or concentrating on that a lot more. But you are looking at like, okay, there's a natural wonder here. I can get a huge buff to science, but it's in a desert. Okay, so what do I need? Is there anything nearby that's going to be a buff to that? Or do I need a specific wonder? So you're thinking about why you want to place it. So you want to place it in a desert. Okay, well, Petra's, at this point in the game, Petra is definitely on the table. If I can get Petra, that's a huge buff for food. Bam! You now have a city. It takes a few turns to get there that has a ton of food, ton of extra stuff from all the desert land, and also has maybe a big science buff from the natural wonder or whatever. You're laughing, right? So that's why you've got to think about your city placement significantly more. Some civs like to you gain bonuses from being very close to the capital, so you have a lot of cities that are close by and having all these adjacency bonuses because you can build like 3 science districts right next to each other and things like that. Like, it all starts to come together, you know, and placing a city, there's different reasons for it. you know, oh, I get a buff from being on hills, I get a buff from being on mines, you know, and so it starts synergizing with the last point I was making of, you know, playing the strengths of that civ. So big thing, figuring that stuff out. And then one thing that I think is really important is the early game checks and the late game checks, because if you play this game, which I do a lot with other people, we play on online speed. Online speed can be quite brutal if you, like, yes, it's a faster game, 250 turns, but if by turn 50 or turn 60 you're starting to slip in certain areas, it's a very good chance that whoever's doing better in those areas is going to get a bigger gap if you don't know how to check it. So like early game checks, for example, are like figuring out a place where you can have a coastal city, because that's huge. There's also like figuring out, you know, where, like, having that land information. Scouting early is hugely important. You don't have to scout far and wide to start with. You just need to have an overall idea of, like, here's a couple of city placements, these are like the luxury resources I've got, and there's some coast, there's a river, you know, things that are going to help speed along that process, because you need to make those decisions quickly. Sometimes, like, I was always under the impression, you know, for the longest time, that I'll always settle on turn 1 wherever my city starts, because that'll be the best place. That's not really the case. It can be, but sometimes moving your units just around a little bit and going, actually, if I move it 2 tiles north, I'm going to be able to have it as a coastal city. I've got a river with no floodplains, which is great. The floodplains can be great, but they can also be devastating. And also a ton of, there's food here, there's resources, you know, and there's a lot of, like I said, what I call early game checks. That, you know, who else is around you, figuring things out. Like, once you've kind of got like the city layout sort of done, then you want to know what's around you. Can you block someone in? Can you stop people from coming into your lands? Are there any like mountains that can be a natural defense? There's a ton of things like that. There's all these different choices you're trying to make, and that, once you've kind of figured that out, then you can start to look late game, which is, okay, this is the city I've got, these are the wonders I want, this is the playstyle I get, and then looking at the text and essentially going, okay, so about maybe the industrial age, I'm going to have a huge spike, but I've got to get there first. So how do I set up for that? Because maybe you'll play one of the versions of England gets a huge spike. I think it's in the industrial age, or gets a bunch of like extra resources. So that's the play. Okay, right, I've set myself up nicely for that earlier on because I thought about what I need to do. Bam, off we go. So that the early game checks and the late game checks are super important. And a lot of the things I've just been saying, I think that's where I have been sat for the longest time, trying to understand these things. Some unwillingness, I will be honest, but like, you know, finally like looking and going, okay, maybe if I slow my game down, look at what I'm doing, how do I put myself in a better situation, how do I understand this civ, the adjacency, focusing my cities, all that sort of stuff, and figuring out to set myself up for a better late game. Because sometimes I have a really good early game and I waste it hard, and you know, that's just for the longest time just been how I played. I'm like, well, you know, but if I want to improve and I wanted to get better, then I needed to like start figuring other things out. So we move on to what I call level 3. So that was level 2. Level 2 I think is a place where I was stuck for a very long time. Level 3 I consider a lot of knowledge checks, a lot of understanding the deeper mechanics, having knowledge on what things do, things like that. So for example, you understand the synergies of wonders, districts and resources. So at this point, you realise adjacency is a really important part of the game. But, okay, so I put down districts. I'm like, in the game, I'll use the tax. I'm like, okay, this gives me these buffs. Maybe there's certain wonders I want. Maybe there's certain resources that also buff my district. Or, you know, other things around that. So how do I do that? So now it's like a game of, okay, right, I definitely want these wonders, because these wonders give me all these abilities, but they also give me a massive spike to a particular resource, let's say. For example, if you're building a culture district, putting around wonders also gives a big buff to that district. So maybe you're going, hey, actually, I'm thinking of getting, I don't know, like, what's a good example of a decent district? Maybe I'm looking for one of the districts that gives out more culture. So what you're doing there is then allowing you to go, okay, I've got my culture district, I'm building up a lot of culture, that's the victory condition I want to get to. what wonders can I get that are also going to do that and also give culture? So maybe a bit later on in the game, you get one of the ones that's like, hey, this one has like a bunch of like writing slots, painting slots, and gives +5 culture. Slap that down next to your culture district, you're also producing even more culture. So you're constantly thinking about the synergies of this stuff. Now, I'm really bad at remembering what all of the wonders do. I remember what some of them do, and I don't always remember what every single thing is that they do. For example, Big Ben gives doubles your money. When it's built, it's like, bam, doubles your money. I think it also adds like an extra slot, potentially. Like, I think it's a wildcard slot or something like that, and that adds to it. So then you've now got this extra bonus. So it's remembering what these wonders do and how to, like, essentially, you know, figure out, not just build it for the sake of building it, what does that add to my gameplay? And that was something that, once I was like doing all the bonuses with the districts and getting those placements down and some of the resources, where can I fit in certain wonders here as well to help with that? So that was part of it. After that, looking at something that I was really bad at, and still kind of am, this is something I'm still working on, is, you know, I'll just build everything in a city. Sometimes it's better to just look at what the city needs in terms of building wise and in terms of builder improvements, and just do the things that you want, do the things that you need rather than what you want. So for example, maybe you don't need a lot of food in this city, because you don't need a lot of farms, because this city's got a lot of natural, like, just tiles that have a lot of food. So that builder then should be spent doing improvements on the luxury resources, or the bonus resources, or the resources that you use for your, like, you know, iron and coal and stuff like that. And the same with the buildings in the city. Well, my city's not starving. I don't need a granary right now. Like, looking at what your choices are, it's like, what do I need? I can buy that later on. I can potentially just use that while I'm waiting to unlock another tech. So, like, really honing in on what a city needs, rather than just being like, oh, just build all this stuff, it's what, you know, just help that. Because, like, maybe you do want to make your cities grow exponentially. So you want a granary, you want a water mill if you can have it, you want all the things that are going to go boom and make that city explode in terms of population. But something, maybe you don't want that. Maybe the city's like got 10 population and you're thinking, oh, I could add some stuff. It's like, well, do I need it right now, or do I want to focus on other things like building science districts and getting those buildings, or culture districts, things like that. Really looking at it and getting away from, you know, just willy-nilly things like that. Same with the builders. Like, okay, a builder's got free charges. Do you need to use it all right now? Or maybe you build the builder, you get that luxury resource. There's a couple of other luxury resources, but you don't need the amenities. So maybe you save that builder until you need him, or you can use him to go and do other things, or bounce in between cities, and not just going, oh, I'm just gonna take all those tiles and just improve them because I can. Like, it's not that it's a waste per se, but there are going to be times when you actually need, oh crap, I've got -1 amenities. Well, that's alright, well, I've still got these other luxuries. Bam, I can stick one down, and that's made everyone happy. Or I needed to build on this iron mine. I've got to build a worker or buy a worker. So rather than wasting those resources and doing that for that one thing, you've got one that maybe you've still left over. It has one charge left. You're like, perfect, bang. Now I've got iron income and we're golden. So a lot of stuff like that. Something that I'm trying to be better at as well now is going back to that early game, late game checks, but now looking about 20 turns ahead. Where am I going to be in 20 turns? Now, this is a really difficult thing to do because you don't know what you're going to encounter. Barbarians are a massive skill check in some areas, like understanding what the barbarians do. That's a whole nother thing. Understanding what they do and how you've got them set up, and how they are there to slow you down sometimes. But, like, you know, what am I doing right now? How do I get to an even better position in 20 turns? And I use 20 turns because sometimes things, you know, you're going to need a bit of time, but in 20 turns, are you going to have explored more of the map? Is that your goal there, to, like, really understand? Is your goal maybe to, I want to build 2 more cities? Alright, well, how long is that going to take? Do I have the resources to buy settlers right now? Do I need to be able to see more of the land before I do that? Or maybe the next goal is, okay, I've only got a couple of cities, but I really want to, like, power up on culture. I really want to power up on science. What's the best way of doing that right now? And why are you doing that? Okay, well, if I can get this and this, I can get these huge bonuses. That means I can start plowing my way towards better. Let's say if it's culture, you're going for a better government type. All right, well, it's looking a little bit far away, but with the like this placement of my culture district and these buildings put in there within those turns, I should be pretty much on track to get that civic and that government and be able to do that. So there's a lot of like figuring that stuff out. It's not the most important thing, but I think once you get to this stage of the game, you're constantly thinking about like, okay, what am I doing right now? What is that benefit? Where am I going to be in 20 turns? What can I do? That kind of stuff. So a lot of thinking ahead. One thing that I don't do a lot of, but I can see what's really important, is kind of switching your techs and civics on the fly more often, and also playing for those Eurekas. Now, a lot of Eurekas you just kind of do through natural gameplay. You'll just get them because you'll be building walls, or you'll be building types of military units, stuff like that. But sometimes it's like you could be working your way through a civic or a tech, and sometimes it's like, well, I've only got a couple turns left, I'll switch to something else. I don't need it right now, but I could get a head start on some other things. And you can kind of do this with buildings in your city and units as well, where you can start building something, do it for a couple turns, switch to something else when something more important comes up. And it's a lot of that micromanagement of like, well, I'm going to work on this because I want this. Oh wait, now I need these things. This is like, the game's changed within like 2 to 3 turns. I think I need to lean more towards a different way, and every turn kind of looking at where you are and what you're going for now, and that gets very micromanagement heavy. And I'm not saying that you want to do that every turn, but there is a possibility that you will be switching things far more often. A lot of the time I'm just like, okay, I want that tech, it's going to take me 10 turns, that's fine, no problem, whatever. I'm now going to go and work on other Eurekas for other things like civics and other techs, and then just leave it for the 10 turns. Well, a lot can happen in 10 turns depending on where you've spawned, what's around you. You might suddenly go, actually, I need to focus more on military right now because these barbarian encampments have turned up and they've got men at arms and I've only got swordsmen. So, you know, okay, I can hold them at bay. You know, maybe you don't need it. Maybe you're like, actually, I've got a big enough army, I can just hold them off for the longest time. I'm going to go back to focusing on something else entirely. So there is a lot of that as well. One thing that I definitely don't do, but I think is hugely important, is, so you've got those radial buttons, but later on, once you're kind of more confident with your city, you'll notice that you can move your individual population around to different things. I think there is a level to that. I don't think you need to do this, but I think there is a level to that which will give you all the right kind of buffs and changes you need to a city, and I think that's hugely important. And I think that can be a big game changer between people playing sort of mid-level to like high level. You know, maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but I do think being able to actually like figure out where you can put your individual populations for the biggest buffs is huge. And that's something that I need to work on myself and understand and figure that stuff out, because I think there is the game lets you do it for a reason. The game lets you get quite granular for a lot of reasons. Like, you can swap tiles with other cities when you got them nearby. There's probably a very good reason to do that, and I've done that myself. But you know, it's all of those little things do add up to like improving things and speeding up, because you're constantly trying to get your cities to do things efficiently very quickly. Oh, it's only going to take me like no more than 5 turns to get this, or can I buy it? No, I don't have the money for that. Okay, well, I can use the money to do this, or you spend faith on it. Like, there's so many different, like, you know, we're not even touching on every single mechanic, but I think being able to just get more granular with the game in general, if that's your kind of thing, can definitely give you those huge, like, you like suddenly look at someone's culture and they've gone from like 100 to like 500, and you're like, how has this happened? And that's from their policies, from like setting their cities a certain way, like certain wonders, tons of stuff, right? So it is a lot more like figuring that out, but I do think looking at a city, rather than using the radial buttons, you may be like, well, actually, I don't want to go full into this, but if I place a population here, this is actually going to give me a massive buff if I do this in a couple of cities, kind of thing. So there's that to think about. And then I think lastly, it just comes down to a lot of information checks, like wonders, or what certain buildings do, what units do. I'm not very good at retaining that information. If you know what most of the wonders do in the game and why you would build them and where you would build them, that gives you a massive leg up on someone else. If you know what most of the buildings do, for example, like, you know, you build a granary because it gives you extra housing, extra food, but like, do you know what the late game buildings do? Do you know that building a sewer gives you plus housing? Do you know that getting a food market or getting like a shopping center, like, what do they do? Oh, one of them adds tourism. You know, really understanding those things and figuring that stuff out and having that knowledge in the back of your head. Now, I think a lot of people just naturally over time do that, but there are a lot of late game stuff that I don't really know. Like, you know, there's a lot of wonders. I was like, well, why would I ever build like this wonder or that wonder? and then you go, oh, I want that big like dome thing because I can't remember what it's called, because it improves my wind farms, it improves my solar panels, it improves like the green energy, and then that can be a huge buff because when your cities are powered up, they can do things faster. So there's a ton of like information that you need to like almost store in your brain for playing this game, and I think that's one of the most important things that will help somebody, you know, in conjunction with many of the other points that I have made. You know, having that knowledge in your head, going, I need these wonders later on because I have a lot of like mountains around me. This one buffs, like if you get Machu Picchu, for example, it makes me a mountains give +4 bonus, I think it is, to a few different districts. I thought it was just, for the longest time, just the one mountain. It's not. It's pretty much all the mountains in your empire, and that's huge. If you're going for, if you need money and stuff, you can just start plonking things down there and start getting these big money bonuses, and then the more money you've got, you can buy stuff rather than waiting on production, or you can... There's just a ton of things you can do, and having that information in the back of your head, hugely helpful. These are just some of the things that I look at, and I am not a pro at Civ in any means, and people will probably call me out on some of this stuff, being like, well, you should have known this beforehand or whatever. But ultimately, these are what I call the 3 levels of Civ. These are the 3 levels that I feel like I went through, which is learning the game, then understanding some more of the nuance, and then really getting into the nitty-gritty micromanagement stuff to improve my game. I don't think I'm like incredible at it, but I do think I have a better understanding of the game now, meaning I can go forward and do those things. And I know that I'm also a little bit of a lazy player, so there are times where I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to play like, because it's casual. If I'm playing against the AI, I don't necessarily need to do all these things, but having that knowledge in my back pocket means when I play multiplayer and things like that, I can have a better chance at keeping the game competitive rather than getting absolutely trounced. So maybe I'm just bad at Civ. So there we go. You can always go back and watch some of my earlier streams and see how I play. I have improved since then, but you know, that goes to show like kind of like how much there is to this game, or what. Because I always think Civ is one of the easier 4X games, but I'm starting to think Civ might be one of the harder games I've played in terms of just learning. So, but there you go. That is my sort of concepts on Civilization as a game, and the sort of stages that I believe that I went through to try and get to be in a better position to understand the game and be a better player. And hopefully some of that makes sense to you guys. Hopefully that helps people. Maybe there's people out there going, what is he talking about? But it is what it is. So yeah, that's going to do it for me today then. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content like this, then hit subscribe. Links for Facebook and Twitter will be down below in the description as always. And until next video, I will see you then.